Hello, and welcome to this weekly ethical dilemma in science, where we're going to take a look at post-mortem research and ask the question, is this a critical model for biomedical research, or is it possibly mimicking the works in the literary Dr. Frankenstein? So with all of these current events, ethical dilemmas in science, they're based, at least in part, on some type of recent news accounts that came across on the web. In this case, an Associated Press article kind of emphasizing kind of what's going on with a New York University doctors and researchers. This is a report that came out July 12th of 2022, where they're basically looking at the fact that researchers have transplanted two pig hearts, actually a pig heart, into two separate brain-dead individuals. So individuals that had died of natural causes, had been diagnosed as having died, as having deceased. And then in order to understand about the process of organ transplantation and the body's response to these potential xenografts. Xenografts, a graft from one organism, in this case a pig, one animal, into a human being. And so what they're doing, in this case illustrated here within the diagram from the article, they took these pig hearts, transplanted them into, again, a brain-dead individual, so an individual that has died, is deceased, but their body is being maintained at least at some level with mechanical devices, so potentially a ventilator or something like that, to keep the body, in essence, in a kind of biologically living state, even though they are brain dead. And the reason they did that is they wanted to understand what is the human body's response early on to these pig transplants. One of the big concerns with transplanted organs is how the body responds. Are they going to accept the organ, or are they going to mount some type of protective response and try to reject it as a foreign tissue that would be potentially doing harm? And so by using these individuals, using these brain-dead individuals that had died of natural causes, they were able to transplant the heart in, but then on a fairly frequent basis, do a series of tests that would not normally be possible on a living individual. So in these early studies, about 3 days, they were able to go through and do very frequent biopsies to look at the cellular response, the response of the body in the hearts that had been transplanted in. And in this article, they expressed an interest to studying it longer, but at least in these early studies, it is for a limited period of time. Now, the kind of the basis of doing this, the basis of studying, pig organ transplantation, got a lot of attention over the last year. Last fall, the fall of 2021, we had a situation where we took a look at transplanting pig organs into individuals. And so in this case, again, another Associated Press article from earlier this year, we're looking at a United States man who received a pig heart transplant that had been genetically engineered in some way, and I'll talk about that on the next slide, to kind of minimize that rejection that occurs between the recipient and the donor tissues. Now, this individual died about 2 months after receiving the pig heart and died of what appears to be heart failure, but they're still not sure what the factors are contributing to that, and the reason why they need to do additional study. Past attempts at looking at bodies using animal organs in general have failed over a period of time. So the first example, or at least one of the early examples of that, was in 1984, where baby Faye lived for 21 days with a baboon heart. More recently, they've been using genetically modified pigs. Pigs, in many cases, are similar in size to human organs. Pig organs are in similar size to human organs. And so there's an ease of transplantation there, as well as pigs have been domesticated and interacting with humans throughout history. And so it minimizes the risk of a disease being transmitted from the pig to the human. There still need to be concerns, to make sure that the tissues don't hold viruses or other types of diseases being present. But this is still kind of an experimental treatment. In this case, it was with an individual that was not eligible for a normal heart transplant. And so the option was, using the FDA compassionate use exemption, he would basically have died without a transplant. And so therefore, he was eligible for the study to receive this pig transplant, this pig heart. Now, when we're taking a look at organ transplantation and this issue of, where are we going to get the organs that we need? The most recent data, and again, recording this in 2022, so the most recent data is from 2021, we can see lots of good news in the field of organ transplantation. In 2021, the most transplants that have been done in the year were 40,000 within the United States. Record numbers of both kidney, heart, and liver transplants, and we're seeing an increase in the number of donations, the actual donations, people that have signed up and actually donated organs. So that's good news. That's definitely the direction that we need to be moving into. But it's not all good news. It's not all rose-colored glasses and all of that. If we take a look at further statistics, we see that even though, as we said, 40,000 transplants last year in 2021, as of earlier 2022, we still have over 100,000 people on the transplant waiting list. And statistically, about 17 people die each day waiting for an organ transplant. And again, looking at all of the statistics provided on this slide, a new person on average is added every 9 minutes. And so, we're making great progress in recruiting more organ donors and having more organs being donated. But we've still got a massive gap between the organs that are available and the patients that need that. And so there's a desire to find kind of an alternative source for these organs. So as I said, one of the goals is to take a look at pigs. Pigs grow rapidly. They're about the same size with human beings, at least the organs are. But at least in the past, there have been a lot of rejection of these pig tissues. They're just recognized as being very different from human tissues. And so the human body is going to mount a protective response, an immune system response to reject these cells and tissues that are different from what's normally found within the body. So a variety of different types of genetically engineered organisms, in this case genetically engineered pigs, where they've gone through and basically made the pig cells less pig-like. And so what's illustrated here, 4 pig genes that are knocked out, basically kind of preventing these genes from being expressed from the proteins associated with it being found on the cells and kind of mounting an immune response by the recipient's body. And then it also had some human genes that were added in. So basically you've made a pig and made pig organs that are less pig-like and more human-like, with the goal of potentially reducing the amount of rejection that would be occurring. Now, this whole area of xenotransplantation has been covered in previous ethical dilemmas in science, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail here, although to point out that there's a really great article that came out earlier this year taking a look at ethical concerns involved with transplanting pig organs, in this case pig kidneys, into human beings, and I'll link to that below within the comments. So the main focus of this is this idea that we need to have organs for transplantation. We've got people on the waiting list that have had diseases or some type of traumatic injury or some type of other life event occurring, so that their normal organs and tissues have failed. They've basically broken down in some way. And so with this process of organ and tissue donation, you can basically, kind of harvest an organ or a tissue from a deceased body and then transplant that into a recipient. And in many cases, a single deceased organ donor can save up to 8 lives. You can pull multiple organs and multiple tissues from one donor. And the hope is that you would be able to get kind of a nice match between the donor's cells and tissues and the recipient's, the patient's immune system, the protective system, so that it's not going to be rejected. Now that is, kind of the main focus of organ and tissue donation. But there's also the opportunity of donating a body to science. And so in this case, a good example of this is cadaver dissection and study by healthcare professionals, in which case, they'll basically take the entire body and then study the body in a controlled and respectful setting in order to be able to learn what's going on. Now, in most cases, the bodies are going to be studied, for about 2 years, and then cremated, and then there'll be a memorial service for the deceased individuals that donated their bodies to science. It is possible that some of these body parts can be used for other types of research, as well as some of the tissues can be preserved for use for an extended period of time. So what we're looking at here is a very different use of donated bodies, a very different use of a deceased cadaver than the traditional organ donation or donating the body to science for studying, where we're actually looking at using the deceased cadaver as a model system, as kind of a kind of deceased but biologically living structure, so that we can study how the cells in the body are going to be working. But we're basically falling into an area where we have a little bit of a catch-22. We have this kind of situation where there aren't clear guidelines on how to use these deceased bodies, the deceased cadavers, in research. And so the Department of Health and Human Services, through the Office of Human Research Protections, has the federal policy on the protection of human subjects, 45 CFR 46.102. And it goes through and it defines human subjects as being a living individual. And so, at least from the government standing and the Office of Human Research Protection, these deceased cadavers are not considered human subjects under the existing federal regulations. It's only if an individual is living. And so for the Office of Human Research Protection, they operate through this idea of having an institutional review board. These are going to be kind of ethics committees that are found at hospitals and universities that are doing research on human subjects. And these institutional review boards are going to be composed of scientists, non-scientists, community members, ethicists, that are involved with reviewing and monitoring biomedical research, in this case involving human subjects, and again, because of the guidelines, looking at living human subjects. And they basically are going to be acting on about 3 different areas. They're going to be focusing in on respect for the persons, so looking at subject autonomy, so making sure that an individual is voluntarily kind of signing up to donate their body, or in this case, donate their body, but in normal cases, to participate in a research study, that they are receiving informed consent, so they have the opportunity to learn what is going to be done to them and make a decision as to whether or not they want to participate based on that information. And so that's respect for persons. The IRBs are also going to be looking at beneficence. Beneficence is this concept of doing no harm. And so if you're going to be doing research on a human subject, you want to maximize the benefits and minimize the risks. So, kind of do the least amount of interaction necessary to get the results that need to be studied. And, minimize the pain and suffering and discomfort that may be occurring. The final area that the IRBs, the Institutional Review Boards, are going to look at is this idea of justice. And so this would be kind of an equitable distribution of the benefits and burdens. And so you're not doing research that's going to benefit one population at the expense of experimenting and potentially kind of exploiting another population. So applying this concept of justice to make sure that the burdens and the benefits are equitably distributed, so that it's not borne out by one group at the expense of the other. Now, in addition to the Institutional Review Board taking a look at kind of living human individuals, we have the organ procurement organizations. These are going to be organizations that are going to be facilitating the kind of collection and donation of organs, tissues, and other body parts, primarily in the realm of medicine, but also they can be associated with it in the areas of science and education. And all of this is under the auspices of the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act that was originally passed in the 1960s and has been updated several times. Now, the main focus of the organ procurement organizations is to get consent from the deceased individual's family. And so you're talking about a group of trained professionals that are going to be very good at interacting with, the bereaved, the individuals that are, kind of upset. They've lost a family member, and they need to make decisions about what's going to happen with the family member's kind of deceased body. And their primary focus is going to be on getting life-saving organs transplanted into patients with a very severe need. Now, in addition to that, we also, if we're going to be looking at the potential of cadaver research, need to be thinking about what's going to be going on in the hospital setting. And so there often, in most cases, hopefully all cases, there's going to be a hospital ethics committee that's going to be involved with reviewing and making recommendations on ethical issues associated with patient cares. Now, this is generally going to be a multidisciplinary team of physicians, nurses, social workers, administrators, chaplains, community members that are going to be focused on the policies and procedures for good quality of ethical patient care. And these committees, then focused on patient care primarily, are going to have limited expertise in the areas of reviewing and approving research. So we end up with this situation where we have a variety of committees that are in place right now, but no single committee or no single agency is really suited for making decisions in reviewing and approving research using, recently deceased individuals, recently deceased cadavers. And so these are a series of articles, and again, I'll link to these in the comment, or at least the note sections down below. A number of articles, peer review articles, where they've looked at what are the guidelines, what is the criteria that should be considered for doing research on recently deceased individuals, especially if you're going to be, transplanting in tissues and keeping the body alive on respirators or heart perfusion devices or other things like that, in order to be able to study them for a period of time. And so what they've been able to illustrate is that there's an absence of universal regulation and guidelines. And so in that absence, each institution, each hospital system, each kind of university medical system that is doing this research is developing their own criteria. They're developing their own committees and applying those criteria kind of individually. And so, articles as early as 2004 and 2005 kind of highlighting the need for this, and then a more recent article in 2016 calling for the fact that we really need these guidelines for what is going to be going on, potentially in a very valuable system for learning what's going on in the body. We can only learn so much from animals and animal models. We can only learn so much from studying cells and tissues in a laboratory artificial setting. And so there's a benefit to, being able to study these transplanted tissues in, real biologically functional tissues. But there is a risk associated with transplanting these tissues that we don't necessarily understand completely into human beings. And so there's a benefit then if we can use a deceased individual to study them for a short period of time. And so if we take a look at each one of these organizations or committees and the role that they could have in making this, and again, one of these papers has referred to this as a committee for the oversight of research involving the dead, and that's the term I'm going to use, CORID, C-O-R-I-D, Committee Oversight Research Involving Dead. Others have, consensus panel on research with the recently dead, and I don't remember what the third article was taking a look at. But basically, we need a committee. Do we need a committee? I guess is an ethical question. I would argue that we do in order to make sure that we have good ethical research going forward. And so our institutional review board, as we said, is focused on the protection of living human subjects. I would strike that out and say, okay, protection of all living subjects. And so their concerns, as we said, was respect for persons, looking at subject autonomy, the ability to make their decisions on their own, and informed consent. So a committee for research on dead individuals would need to look at, is there a pre-mortem decision by the individual to be involved in biological research, biomedical research? Is there an informed consent process? Are they aware of what's going to be going on? Are there family members who are going to assent to providing their deceased loved one's body for this, aware of what's going to be going on? An IRB is going to be concerned with beneficence, that concept of minimizing the risks and doing no harms. And so that committee, taking a look at the cadaver research, is going to want to protect the deceased subject's family, be respectful of the corpse, respectful treatment of the corpse, as well as emphasizing confidentiality to protect the deceased individual's kind of information and information that could be drawn from their participation in that study. In terms of justice, again, that equitable distribution of benefits and burdens, the concern of the IRB, we extend that into the CORID concerns. We need to have universal standards. What does it mean if each institution that is going to be doing this comes up with their own kind of structure, their own set of criteria? And so we could have, kind of different results and different conclusions based on where the work is going to be done. And so there is a potential benefit of having uniform standards and specific criteria. For the organ procurement organizations, again, they are involved with facilitation of organ tissue transplants to patients in need. They're focused on saving lives. They're focused on the immediate, where these research decisions involved with using a cadaver is going to be focused more on the long term. And so because of that, should we have criteria, and I would argue it definitely is something we should be thinking about, that the first priority should be getting organs to patients on the waiting list over the need to learn how to improve transplants in the future, the immediate need over the potential long-term need. Others may have a different view associated with that. And then finally, the hospital and the Hospital Ethics Committee is going to be focused on ensuring patient resources, patient care resources. So the hospital is going to be concerned on access to beds and medical devices. Are we going to be doing these types of procedures in an intensive care unit? Is that going to take attention away from the other patients that are going to need care within the unit? Are we going to be diverting beds that could potentially be used for sick people to be doing the research? So the committee for doing the research, do they need to have dedicated research space, or at least access to this life-extending medical devices, ventilators, dialysis machines, heart perfusion machines? How does that relate with the needs of a hospital system? And finally, the hospital is focused on medical treatment, where the research is going to be using research staff. And in many cases, should there be a separation between the treatment of the patient up until death and research that's going to be going on after the individual has been declared deceased? And again, potentially not having research staff, calling a patient as having deceased to eliminate, potential conflicts of interest. So this gives rise to the ethical dilemma in science for this talk. What type of approval process, or what type of approval should be required for researching living functions in a deceased body? How should a committee for oversight of research involving the dead operate? What categories of individuals should serve on the committee for appropriate representation and informed discussions? Should there be national or institutional requirements and guidelines for this type of research? Should it be done at the local level, or should there be federal guidelines on what's going to be going on? What criteria, what different types of criteria should be considered to ensure ethical and appropriate research with a deceased body? Should there be limits on the types of research or the research duration? We're looking at right now, the studies have been done for about 3 days with an interest in going longer. But if you do that, potentially you're delaying the amount of time before the body would then be released for, return to the family and a memorial service and potential burial. So lots of things that we need to be considering as well. Now, I try not to give my own opinion. I did a little bit more on this one. I probably need to be more careful with that. And so, pardon this blatant commercial interruption here as we end up today's talk. I encourage you. There is a dramatic need for organs and tissues for donations. Especially for individuals in underrepresented populations. The statistics for minority populations, minority donors are getting better, but in many cases, individuals from underrepresented, at least underrepresented donor populations, have difficulty getting matches, getting tissues that their bodies are going to accept. So I encourage all of us that if you don't have, severe reservations against organ donations, or, and potentially, kind of religious objections to that as well, to look into it, to research what is involved, and make an informed decision. I'm not calling for all of you to go out and sign up to be an organ donor. But if it is something that is remotely interesting to you, I encourage you to kind of find out what is involved, to learn about what the process is, and make an informed decision as to whether or not you want to be an organ donor or not. It's relatively easy within Pennsylvania. You can do this when you're renewing your driver's license, but there are also national registries that you can sign up with as well. And that information I'll include in the description below. So thank you. Went a little bit longer with the commercial, but hopefully you enjoyed this ethical dilemma in science for this week. Please see the description below for further information and references, and come back next week where we're going to have another ethical dilemma in science related to some current event. Thank you and have a great week.